This presentation is about wrongful convictions based on witness misidentifications. Edinburgh, University of Pennsylvania, spring semester of 2014. Wrongful convictions are based on several different things: false confessions, junk science, governmental misconduct, informants, bad lawyering, and eyewitness misidentification. To date, there have been 314 exonerations. Most of these exonerations have been proved through the use of DNA. Witness misidentification is the leading cause of wrongful convictions. Misidentification is responsible for roughly 75% of the exonerations for the wrongfully convicted. Half of these are based on multiple wrong identifications. Studies suggest that up to 5% of all convictions may be wrongful, as some cases rely solely on witness identifications. Not all cases have DNA present to be used for exoneration. Here we see why most exonerations come from rape or murder cases. They're more likely to have biological evidence left behind. Human memory is prone to error. There are 3 stages in the memory process: encoding, retention, and recall. The memory is susceptible to contamination at any of these stages. We need to handle memories as trace evidence. They are susceptible at any time to become degraded. We should videotape initial statements by any potential witness when the memory is at its freshest. In the case of the Commonwealth v. Francis, the witness had described a bank robber as wearing short sleeves with no distinctive markings. When in trial, it was proven that the defendant had tattoos covering his arms. The conflict resulted in a hung jury. At the second trial, the witness remembered that the robber was wearing long sleeve, not short sleeve, at the time of the crime. When the memory is confronted with a conflict, the memory can alter itself to explain the conflict, such that the witness believes that what they are telling is the truth. There have been a few landmark cases in the field of witness identification. The first 3 cases that have been made in the field are referred to as the Wade Trilogy. Wade deemed that there was a violation of the 6th Amendment right to counsel for a physical lineup. He was denied a 5th Amendment violation as being put into the lineup. Gilbert ruled for an automatic exclusion of testimony of witnesses lineup in the absence of counsel. Stovall ruled suggestive identifications were inadmissible in trial. Simmons ruled that there was no constitutional right to a lawyer for a photographic lineup. Kirby ruled that there was no 6th Amendment violation for a pre-indictment lineup. Neal set forth the 5 criteria for determining the reliability of an identification. The 5 criteria are the opportunity to view the offender, the degree of the attention paid to the offender, accuracy of the description, the level of certainty, the time that has elapsed between the crime and the lineup. These are commonly referred to as the Manson standard because Manson affirmed Neal and clarified the criteria. Perry limited the admissibility of an identification to if it was suggestive by the police. There are 2 methods used to do a photographic lineup. The first is the simultaneous method, where the witness are shown 6 photos at the same time. This allows the witness to view them all at once. In doing this, however, witnesses tend to compare the photos to each other and choose the one that looks most like the offender. While in the second method, the sequential method, the witness is shown 6 photos again, but only views one at a time. This forces the witness to compare individual photos to their memory instead of the other photos provided. The double-blind procedure is when a lineup is administered by an investigator that has no knowledge of who the suspect is. In using a blind administrator, it helps to prevent any intended or unintended utterance of whom to choose. It also helps prevent confirming or disconfirming feedback. As studies have shown, when a witness receives confirming feedback, they tend to exaggerate the attention paid to the offender and report to be more confident. The using of computers as the blind administrator eliminates the possibility of any type of utterance from the police or an investigator. In small towns, it may be near impossible to find an investigator not familiar with the case. The use of computers also frees up the officer's times. And the sequential method had a higher identification rate and a lower filler identification rate, suggesting an improved accuracy. System variables are conditions that the criminal justice system can control, such as a lineup administration and double-blind testing, witness instructions, lineup construction, witness feedback. Estimated variables are conditions that the criminal justice system cannot control, such as the stress, weapon focus, duration of the offense, the distance between the witness and offender, lighting conditions, the witness's age, intoxication, cross-racial identifications. New Jersey's courts decided State v. Henderson. Henderson required a more thorough pre-trial determination of admissibility. The jurors received more instructions about the reliability of the witness's identification. Henderson also deemed the Manson standards unreliable. The 5 reasons behind this were that there was a narrow view of what was suggestible, reinforces suggestibility, few judges choose to suppress witness evidence, and the totality of circumstances reviewed in a checklist fashion, and 3 of the 5 criteria, the opportunity to view the crime, the degree of attention, and the degree of certainty, are all self-reported by the witness. New York is a pioneer in the post-conviction DNA testing. In 1994, New York passed a law for post-conviction DNA testing. There are 2 criteria that an inmate must meet in order to be granted testing. The first is the evidence must have been secured at the time of the trial. The second is if the testing would result more favorably to the defendant. And from 1994 until 2001, 7 people have been exonerated through this law. Illinois followed suit and passed its own post-conviction DNA testing law in 1997. They differed a little bit, and their 3 criteria were conviction occurred before DNA technology was available. It must be based solely on witness identifications. And the evidence must have been secured at the time of the trial. Illinois has resulted in 14 people being exonerated between 1997 and 2001. The expert testimony argues that takes away from the jury who is supposed to determine the credibility of the witness. The jurors already have the knowledge from their own experience and can make the juries more doubtful than they ought to be. The jury instructions are used to make them aware of things that they don't know. Not that it's above their knowledge, but to bring to light what to pay attention for. Juror instructions allows us to have the jury pay attention to certain aspects of a witness's testimony. In the United States v. Telfair, they developed 4 factors for jurors to consider when evaluating the witness testimony: the witness's capacity and opportunity to observe, the identification. The identification is a product of the witness's recollection, if the witness failed to identify the suspect previously, and the credibility of the witness. Ronald Cotton was convicted of rape. He was identified by the victim, who was certain that it was Cotton. She had been called in to view another man, Bobby Poole, who confirmed in her mind that it was not Poole, but in fact Cotton. 10.5 years later, the DNA confirmed that Cotton was not the offender, but it also revealed that the true offender was in fact Bobby Poole. Next, Kirk Bloodsworth had spent 8 years in prison, 2 of those on death row. He had been identified not by 1 or even 2, but 5 witnesses. He was exonerated through DNA also, and this too revealed the true perpetrator, Kimberly Shea Ruffner, who pleaded guilty to the rape and murder of 9-year-old Dawn Hamilton in 2004. Much research is still needed in the field of witness identification. With the research we have available, we need to look at what results in the more accuracy. By combining sequential and the double blind together, we take a majority of the bias out of the identification. When identification is made and it makes its way into the courtrooms, we need to utilize the use of either expert testimony to educate the jurors or juror instructions to allow them a way to be more critical of what they're hearing. We also need to look to New York and Illinois to create guidelines to allow post-conviction DNA to ensure that if we do have an injustice on our hands, that we have a way of correcting it, to not allow an innocent person to spend any more time in jail than they have to. They've been forced to.